US President Donald Trump has once again shocked Europeans. The US is indeed leaving NATO, but will do so gradually. The United States plans to significantly reduce its military contribution to the North Atlantic Alliance and shift a substantial part of Europe's defense onto its European allies. This was reported by Spiegel, citing a closed briefing at the alliance headquarters by US Department of Defense Representative Pete Hegseth for his European colleagues. According to the publication, Washington intends to reconsider its participation in the NATO force model and has already urged its allies to start compensating for future gaps as soon as possible. In fact, it was stated that the US will not only withdraw soldiers from Europe, but they will also remove missiles, aviation, and the fleet from Europe. But the paradox is that European defense ministers have already admitted that they couldn't even arrange a meeting with their American counterpart Pete Hegseth. It was made clear there why Germany and the Netherlands said they are not going to Europe. But what's even more dangerous is that Trump still found a way to bypass US law, and they will withdraw troops from Europe. And now, by the way, it has become clear why Germany and the Netherlands are urgently creating a new army corps to protect the Baltic countries. My name is Alexi Pichi, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video so that YouTube's algorithms will recommend this episode to as many viewers as possible. I will be grateful for your comments. And subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, last Friday, the Pentagon gathered high-ranking NATO officials and announced to them a plan to reduce US forces in Europe. As specified by the German publication Spiegel, the US plans to reduce the number of fighter jets by about a third within NATO, significantly cut the number of strategic bombers, and also stop providing submarines. In addition, it is planned to reduce participation in support operations, in providing destroyers, reconnaissance, and strike drones, as well as tanker aircraft. According to the participants of the meeting, the signal from the American side about this was unambiguous. The point is that the Americans have decided to significantly reduce their weapons and equipment in Europe and simply withdraw them. And unfortunately, this is such a cunning move by Donald Trump because we have already discussed this with you. A law was enacted in the United States late last year. It prohibits the American president from reducing the number of troops, the number of soldiers in Europe below the level of 76,000 soldiers. Apparently, Trump's team decided, okay, we can leave 76,000 soldiers, but just withdraw the military equipment from Europe. Once again, these are fighter jets, aerial refueling aircraft, bombers, missile systems, drones, plus components of the naval fleet. At the same time, Washington made it clear that it will maintain nuclear deterrence in Europe, but wants to shift more of the continent's conventional defense to European countries. And now Pete Hegseth's advisor explained this position by the changing global situation. According to the US, European allies have already increased defense spending and are capable of taking on more responsibility. For Brussels, these plans were unexpected. European diplomats had anticipated gradual changes, but the scale of the proposed cuts turned out to be broader. At the same time, it will be very difficult to quickly replace some of the American capabilities. If there's a shortage of fighter jets, well, it can be partially compensated by supplying F-35s. So what? The Bundeswehr, Germany's Ministry of Defense, will get its first of these planes next year, while Poland already has its first 3. But when it comes to strategic bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons, that's a problem, because Europeans simply don't have any. Plus, replacing American aircraft carriers remains problematic. And according to Spiegel, the Donald Trump administration is promoting the concept of NATO 3.0, which assumes that Europeans should take on almost all of the continent's conventional defense in a short period of time. What's happening in the alliance is already being called a turning point, and by the beginning of June, mind you, by the beginning of June, that is literally within the next week, and NATO allies must present a proposal to replace American capabilities. And Washington expects to formalize the new model of burden sharing at the NATO summit in July. And now, The guest, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has already explained why this is happening. He says we simply need troops in other regions. Now, let me give you a few more details. And the briefing for the Europeans was conducted by Alexander Wells Green. For context, he is the deputy of Elbridge Colby, and Elbridge Colby is the deputy of Pete Hegseth for political affairs. He is exactly the person who lobbied in 2025, for example, for disconnecting Ukraine from US intelligence data. This is the person who lobbied for the suspension of military aid in 2025. And it was Elbridge Colby who at that time lobbied for the idea of not giving intelligence data to Ukraine, which forced the Ukrainian armed forces to withdraw from the Kursk region. Elbridge Colby handled everything, while his deputy briefed the Europeans. He presented the audience with specific figures regarding the US involvement in Europe. The proposal turned out to be much more radical than the Europeans expected. Let me emphasize again, the Europeans were expecting only minor adjustments, but the Americans made a drastic cut. A one-third reduction in fighter aircraft, a significant cut in strategic bombers, the withdrawal of both aircraft carriers currently in Europe, and on top of that, the withdrawal of all submarines. The US is also completely removing reconnaissance drones and reducing the number of strike drones. Moreover, the Europeans have been given a strict deadline, so once again, by the beginning of June, they must present a plan for how all of this will be done and with what resources. Why such a rush? The thing is, on July 7th and 8th, the annual NATO summit will be held in Ankara, Turkey. And at this summit, the Americans want to announce a new NATO force model in which the US simply withdraws from Europe. They want to announce this already in July. For Europeans, almost all of the above is a big problem. That is, again, as I said, the F-35s can still somehow be replaced, meaning the Americans are taking theirs back, but Germany and Poland are already buying the same planes for themselves. But when it comes to strategic bombers, well listen, Europeans don't have them at all as a class. That is, basically, they don't have such bombers at all. They don't make them. Accordingly, if the Americans take theirs away, that's a problem. Aircraft carriers pose the same issue. Trump was right about the Europeans on this point. There are issues here. Besides, the Europeans simply don't have and won't have anytime soon any aerial refueling tankers. Those are the planes that refuel others in the sky. And this, let me remind you, is a key element of NATO's combat concept, which is focused on air superiority. In addition, this ULS Green stated, and I quote, "The US is ready to work closely with those partners who are ready to act quickly." And some Europeans took this as an indirect threat that the US would not defend them in case of an attack. And it's funny that at the meeting with the foreign ministers of NATO countries on the same Friday, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, explained the decision by the US commitments in the Asia-Pacific region, the Western Hemisphere, and the Middle East. And Rubio said that we need to be realistic and, I quote, "give the US the opportunity to prepare for a conflict on two fronts." Here's the question, which two fronts are those? Iran and Cuba? Well, according to Donald Trump, the US isn't going to fight China over Taiwan. Once again, it seems that, according to the current presidential administration's plan, the US has three operational zones: the Western Hemisphere, which is where Cuba is, the Asia-Pacific region, where China and Taiwan are, and the Middle East, where the war with Iran is happening now. Trump says we won't fight for Taiwan, and Rubio says we need troops on two fronts. Logic suggests that it's a war with Cuba and Iran at the same time. It's also important to note that German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius admitted that during his recent visit to the US and Canada, he wasn't even able to get a meeting with US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The head of the Pentagon had other priorities, and he went to a security conference in Singapore. A key European ally arrived and was brushed off. They were told, "We don't have time for you now." And against this backdrop, the Europeans are finally taking action. Germany and the Netherlands have decided to create a new American Rapid Response Corps to defend the Baltic countries in case of a Russian invasion. The Corps' headquarters will be based in the German city of Münster, and the main task of the Corps will be to quickly provide a large number of troops. It is expected that up to 60,000 soldiers could be included in it. This will be the second NATO Army Corps created for the defense of the Baltic states, but the first one focused exclusively on the Baltic countries. Currently, NATO has an army corps deployed with its headquarters in Szczecin, Poland, but it is also responsible for Poland. In general, Europeans have finally started to react to all this rather quickly. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video or by using the QR code on your screens. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.